The presentation. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this journey and being a part of this conversation, which revolves around Vision 2020, a transformation and sustainability plan that will, in fact, transform the Hoboken Housing Authority community. That is, its purpose is to revitalize our community, and most importantly, it's to ensure that you, the residents of the Hoboken Housing Authority, have a better quality of life, and we're enhancing your living conditions. Many of you have been a part of the first presentation and second, so I thank you for being committed and being a part of this again. I want to recognize Chairman Rob Davis, who's in the audience. Thank you, Chairman, for being here. Yes, that's a good, nice round of applause. Commissioner Dean Rodriguez. And then we have our professionals. We have with us our architect, Dean Marchetto, who will discuss the existing conditions based off of the physical needs assessment, as well as we'll discuss the design and the creation of the Vision 2020 Transformation and Sustainability Plan for Public Housing. We have with us Joe Portelli, who is the developer, representing RPM, who was selected in April of 2013 to partner up with us to do phase 1 of this project. Joe Portelli. Our program manager and financial advisor, Mr. Dr. Bob Powell. And the engineer who conducted the traffic engineering studies and all of the engineering aspects for phase 1, representing RVE, Tom, and I'll let him say the last name because it's usually Lomanowitz. Okay. So I want to go over exactly what we're going to be talking about. We have packets up here for everyone. If you would like a packet to follow along with what we have been giving every interested resident who has inquired about what Vision 2020 is all about. In this packet, which we have tabbed every aspect from the 112-page plan, which was completed in August of 2010 and shared with the mayor and city officials, to the actual amendments. They are in here as well. Letters of support, as well as the correspondences between the Hoboken Housing Authority and the City of Hoboken in our pursuit for a resolution of need, which we still have not received, as well as the RFQ process, the financial structure that determines how this project will be financed and how the construction would go about. We also have all the resolutions that were approved by the Board of Commissioners unanimously. I will ask that everyone please either place your phones on vibrate, silence them. So that's what we have in this package. So if anyone's interested, rise up or you can come up and get a packet. We have here a timeline of how we got to Vision 2020. Basically, it stemmed from one question that I had asked myself. The question was, where do I see our community in the year 2020? That's what gave birth to this plan and to the vision that basically was created later on by that of the professionals. So I'm going to use the timeline here to go through exactly what we did to get to where we are today and what we will continue to do to hopefully successfully secure our certificate of need. And I don't need a microphone. So, what I want to do here, excuse me, is show you this is the board approval process for Vision 2020. As I stated, what gave birth to Vision 2020 was a question. As many of you know, and those who do not know, I'm a proud product of the Hoboken Housing Authority. Back then we did call it the project, and I've tried my best to educate everyone to say it's the Hoboken Housing Authority. Therefore, for me, growing up as a young boy in the Housing Authority in 320 Jackson, I always felt that there had to be a better way to live within our community. I knew that someday we can give our families the equality, the justice, and the housing that they deserve. So in 2009, March of 2009, we received stimulus funds, which was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funds. And what we did from those funds, we basically commissioned for a physical needs assessment to be conducted. Dean Marchetto's firm, Marchetto, Higgins, and Stevie, was the firm that conducted that physical needs assessment. And what I want Mr. Marchetto to walk you through real quickly, Dean, is what does a physical needs assessment entail?
Well, thank you, Director. My firm is an architectural firm here in Hoboken, and we worked on this plan since 2009. First thing we did was we come into the existing buildings, we do an inspection, and we try to identify what all the difficulties are with the existing buildings. The size of the rooms, the elevators, the windows, and the roofing, and all the costs to keep these buildings maintained. And we did this report called the Physical Needs Assessment that resulted in several conclusions about the condition of the buildings and the ability of those buildings to be rehabbed. And that report was delivered to the Housing Authority. I'll be able to go through some of the deficiencies in a summary in my PowerPoint when my turn comes to come back and present that to you.
Thank you, Dean. So in 2009, we received these funds. We're very fortunate. President Obama authorizes the stimulus funds. We commissioned a physical needs assessment. And part of that physical needs assessment, when it was completed, it led to the actual master campus sustainability plan for public housing. From there, it was completed in August of 2010. When it was done, we brought it to the Board of Commissioners. We met with Mayor Zimmer. We met with city officials and said, here's the plan, and HUD. And we shared it with HUD. Shared it with Senator Menendez, shared it with Congressman Series. At the time, we were applying for the Choice Neighborhood Initiative grant, which was another opportunity that President Obama had put out for housing authorities. And what it did was, it picked up from Hope 6 to now his program, the Choice Neighborhood Initiative grant. We applied twice. We had letters of support from the city, letters of support from the county planning department. So we were very fortunate to put together a packet, submit it, but twice we fell short. So in August of 2010, the professionals completed the Vision 2020 plan. And it encompassed 7 chapters, 112 pages. The first order of business was to create a residence bill of rights. That was the first order of business. Because I knew that the #1 factor was that our families needed to know that they are first. Our residents would be protected. Particularly being a product of this environment, growing up in the Housing Authority, knowing that in the past there were the old tales and the fear-mongering of what used to happen during, election seasons in the 1990s and as early as the 2000s. So we knew that that had to be addressed because displacement should not ever be a factor for any type of transition or transformation in replacing public housing. And we learned from the mistakes of other states and authorities, such as Camden, Newark, Jersey City. Lo and behold, in 2010, September of 2010 through 2011, we had meetings. They were held with the mayor and city officials. In June of 2011, we won an award by the New Jersey Futures Organization, and it was an award that said that we had the most comprehensive strategic revitalization plan. It was a 2011 Smart Growth Award. And I will ask the professional Mr. Marchetto to tell us, how do you win that award and how distinct or prestigious that award is. Mr. Marchetto?
Yes, statewide, New Jersey Future Organization holds a competition for plans that are developed that are particularly smart growth plans. We submitted our Vision 2020 plan for the competition, and in 2010 we won an award, along with several other projects in the state, one down in Princeton, and a couple other ones. And the merits of the project was such that because this housing authority had an opportunity to transform itself and become part of the community by making new buildings that fit into Hoboken, became sandy-proof, and had transportation on the 2nd Street Light Rail and the 9th Street Light Rail directly adjacent, that this project met all the qualifications for a Smart Growth Award. So this was a statewide project, and a statewide competition rather, and the project was honored with an award that year.
And this was, again, a great honor for us as the Hoboken Housing Authority, because what they saw was that, A, we did have also that protection in place on that Tenants' Bill of Rights, which is in the packet and was in that original plan that we created, and continues to this day to be a part of not just policy, but also has been authorized by HUD in what we intended to do in protecting our families. So in 2012, June of 2012, we pressed forward. Commissioner Rodriguez, Chairman Davis, unanimously the board approves to go out and hire a program manager financial advisor, which is Dr. Powell and his team, Nassau Capital Advisors. The purpose of that was we were pursuing the low-income housing tax credits, and we wanted to pursue the rental assistance demonstration program. And you need an expert who's been dealing with that type of funding to put the application together, which is a very rigorous application process. And he'll talk a little bit about that piece, because I think it's important to know what that entails. And then in August of 2012, we did presentations to the subcommittee of the City Council, and we actually met with them. There was twice we met with the city, then the next one was the subcommittee of the City Council, which was the Community Development Subcommittee. They had questions about the plan. They thought the plan was an excellent plan. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah.
Okay. They thought the plan was an excellent plan. What they decided to do was to say to us in August of 2012, go back and let's now scale down the concept that had a strategic capacity. What Mr. Marchetto said and did was the following. He said, if you were to tear down all the buildings, you have 18 acres on this campus, you would be able to build 1,853 units. Always the #1 priority has been the 806 units that we want to replace, that you and I both know we deal with every day, the mechanical, obsolete mechanical parts, the age, Nana can attest to it, Ms. Walker who works for us, the age of the buildings. We don't have the funding to do all the brick repointing and all the buildings. We do not have the funding to replace all the roofs, and if you're following what's happening in Congress and with sequestration, you and I both know that every year they're cutting our funding. We are at a point where this year they will be cutting our funding by another probably $1.7 million. And as I share with everyone mathematically, very simple calculation. Last year we got $1.7 million for capital fund improvements. We paid $540,000 to the City of Hoboken for additional police services. You deduct that amount of money, it leaves us with an amount that now we are embattled with, because $800,000 automatically comes off of the top of that, which goes back to the debt leveraging bond that Mr. DeVinson, my predecessor, had to take out, because if you recollect the history, in 2004, the predecessor, Mr. Washington, had absconded the $4 million that this authority did not have. So from there, that is important to know, because we don't have the funding every year to properly keep these buildings up to par, and we will never have them become ADA compliant, enough light and air or ventilation. So lo and behold, in August of 2012, we did the presentations. The Board of Commissioners in August of 2012 scaled down the plan to 1,002 units, focusing on the 806 apartments. And then the balance of that would be integrated. The balance of that. But at first we were focused on the 806 units. And Mr. Marchetto would talk about the design, which I will allow him to jump in now and talk about that design. Mr. Marchetto. Huh? I know.
Hello.
Okay.
Went to the metro,
Oh,
You went to the men's audio.
to the little boy.
well, yeah.
The floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, let me say thank you for asking me to be here tonight. It's been my pleasure to work on this plan at the Housing Authority. I also want to say that I've been working here in Hoboken for 32 years, and during the course of the years, I've had several opportunities over the last 3 decades to work at the Hoboken Housing Authority with repairs, roofs, windows, and working with other former executive directors here at the Hoboken Housing Authority. And I have to say, I've never been more inspired by your current executive director, Mr. Carmelo Garcia. I was genuinely moved when he told me his story about growing up here and coming back to become an executive director to bring home the goods to the Hoboken Housing Authority. You're very lucky to have this executive director, and it's been very impressive to me. The presentation I have today is to tell you a little bit about the design of Vision 2020. The first slide I have is the cover. The first image here is the cover of the book. This book was submitted as part of the New Jersey Smart Growth Awards program. You can see in the table of contents of the book that we talk about the history of Hoboken, the history of the Hoboken Housing Authority. We talk about Hoboken as a community and how the Hoboken Housing Authority should be part of that community. Then the second chapter, chapter 2, deals with the physical needs assessment, which is what I spoke about earlier, that talks about the existing conditions of the buildings, the size, the waterproofing, the roofs, the windows, and the costs of those repairs. Then we go on to the vision, for Vision 2020, to talk about the design. And as Mr. Garcia mentioned earlier, when you look at this campus of 18 acres, and if you were going to design it to look like the rest of Hoboken, you would be able to fit all of those blocks of housing that are around you, and it would add up to approximately 1,800 residential units. Simply take the current Hoboken zoning and just put it on Hoboken Housing Authority property. And here we have 806 units. That tells me that you're a little bit underdeveloped, and there's an opportunity to bring even more affordable housing here into Hoboken, at the Hoboken Housing Authority. Now, typically when these housing authority projects were built after World War II and in the 50s, they located these projects typically in the back of town, not necessarily in the best areas of town, over the railroad tracks in the back of town. And in Hoboken they did the same thing. The main part of Hoboken was basically up on Washington Street, Garden and Bloomfield and Hudson Street, but they located the housing authority all the way back here below the cliffs. As you can see from this photograph, this is your site in 1900. You can see that the housing authority has been located in the flood zone. And if you look at this postcard from 1900, you can see they put the housing authority right there where all the water was. So we have work to do to fix this place and make it sandy proof and raise it up out of the flood zone. Vision 20 provides you with the opportunity to do that. Because as we redevelop, the new development that we put in with the new 806 residential units will allow the funding to create new opportunities and amenities for the residents, as well as replacement housing for all of the 806 existing units. Now, we developed a plan that allows us to build and demolish and build and demolish in a sequence that doesn't displace any residents. Each time a resident is moved, they're not moved out of their apartments until a new apartment is ready. So you never have to leave, and that's part of the plan. This is, of course, what the Housing Authority looked like back in the 1950s. And this is the map of Hoboken. And before, when I mentioned to you that Hoboken Housing Authority was at the back of town, when you look at this map of Hoboken, you can see that Hoboken is made up primarily of rectangular blocks. 200 feet in one direction, 400 feet in the other direction, and the typical housing pattern in Hoboken involves square donut housing, which means that the buildings line the perimeter of the blocks and they front on the street, and everybody's backyard is behind the buildings. In the Hoboken Housing Authority, with these X-shaped buildings at Andrew Jackson Gardens, it's a very different type of building than the building in typical Hoboken housing. And so, you wind up with buildings that do not look like Hoboken buildings. They look like projects. Part of the direction of Vision 2020 is to transition into buildings that look like Hoboken buildings, so you feel like you're part of the community. One other aspect about that, if you look in this map at the grid of Hoboken, you can see right back here at the Hoboken Housing Authority that your buildings are off the grid. Maybe this diagram you can see here. The X-shaped buildings and the long C-shaped buildings do not look like the rest of Hoboken blocks. They're very, very different. And the photograph, if you look now from an airplane, you can see it very clearly in this photograph. The buildings on the bottom of the photograph are typical Hoboken blocks between Monroe and Adams, but the buildings of the Hoboken Housing Authority look very different. So when we first decided to take a look at what was wrong with your buildings, we found that there were 7 basic problems that we can solve in Vision 2020. The first one is that the buildings cannot meet the current fire safety codes because the width of the stairs cannot be made wider. If you were to meet current safety codes today, the stairs would have to be 44 inches wide. Your stairs are 36 inches wide. That can't be changed. You can't make the stairs wider. So no matter how much you renovate these buildings, those buildings could never meet current codes, just because the stairs are physically impossible to widen. If you were to widen the stairs, you'd have to take the building down. So it just can't work. The second thing is that isolated layout of building causes a concentration of poverty. When you have all the Hoboken Housing Authority residents in one spot, it creates a concentration of poverty that's not integrated into the general community. Part of Vision 2020 is to not only provide the 806 units that you have replaced, but to add additional units so you can mix in housing that allows you to graduate from low-income housing to moderate housing and eventually to market rate housing, hopefully. So you mix it in, and therefore the Housing Authority isn't all by itself in the corner, but it's mixed in not only physically, but socially into the whole community, the greater community of Hoboken. The third item is the buildings cannot meet current handicap codes, and many of the buildings don't have elevators. It would be impossible in some of the smaller buildings to actually put elevators in those existing buildings. 4, buildings are very costly to maintain and over time will exceed replacement costs. Those buildings, because they're old, every time you have a problem with a leak or a roof or a window, they're very, very expensive to be able to change. So over time, the maintenance costs add up over the years will actually be more expensive than it would be to replace the buildings. So in short, we're wasting money by trying to put good money after bad. It makes much more financial sense to rebuild the buildings and not lose the money for the wasted repairs.
Let me interject, Dean, by saying that there's a great article from the Jersey Journal with respect to what they did in Jersey City recently with the Harry A. Moore, and those buildings are actually younger than our building.
I have that in here.
And that's something that, you know, I impress upon everyone, that if it's happening, you know, everywhere else, and we're doing it with the protection and uniqueness of actually building that first building, then why are we getting such an objection? Okay.
Number 5, the shape of the buildings, the X shape of the buildings has 20% more exterior than a normal modern building. What that means is there's 20% more heat loss, there's 20% more of air conditioning costs. That it's the shape of the building that's inefficient, just the whole shape of it. So you can't fix that without making a new building. That 20% costs utilities 20% more each year than a normal building. So if you were to transition into a modern building, automatically, just because of the shape of the building, would cost you 20% less in energy costs. 6, the lack of opportunity for upward migration. Here you have one type of housing, it's low-income housing. There's no opportunity to go up a notch. This project would allow you to have a stepped-up housing where you can actually increase the quality of your housing as you improve out of low income. And number 7, the social and psychological stigma associated with living in the projects. When you live in the projects, people say, oh, you live in the projects. It's a little bit of a stigma. It's not a good feeling to say, I come from the projects. By integrating the projects into the general development pattern of Hoboken, and they look and feel just like Hoboken buildings, you will no longer have the stigma of being associated with living in the projects. Those are the goals that we would try to accomplish with Vision 2020. This illustration is designed to show you how the Housing Authority just doesn't fit in with Hoboken in general. Here you see the grid of Hoboken, and you can see the Housing Authority buildings' footprints shown in black. And you can see that those buildings don't fit into the regular blocks just like the rest of Hoboken. It's physically different. I don't have to tell you, you could go outside and look at those buildings. They don't look like the buildings across the street. Very different. One other thing. I'll go back to this slide. One of the most important things about living in a dense city like Hoboken is that we have streets that have view corridors. When you have a dense city and you have a street and you come to an intersection and you could look down the street this way, up the street this way, or down the other street, the view of your view from that area extends out past Hoboken. We value our view corridors in Hoboken. When you are on 3rd Street or 2nd Street or 5th Street and you look west, you can see the Palisades. The Housing Authority blocks the view of the Palisades from those street views. So if you look at this picture here, you can look at Harrison Gardens. It's right in the middle of 3rd Street, right here. And if you look down 3rd Street, right here, you can see down 3rd Street, you're looking at Harrison Gardens, and that building blocks your view of the Palisades. So what it does is it prevents light and air and the expansion of the view from moving up and down the streets. In other words, those buildings are blocking the streets, and that's not a good planning element. It's one of the reasons why New Jersey Futures value this as a valuable plan. Here's another example. This is a graphic example to show you how the Housing Authority buildings and the shapes up above are very different than the shapes down below. What you see here on the bottom half of this photo is the footprints of Hoboken buildings lining the blocks. Here you see the Housing Authority above, very, very different. Very different. It can be very clearly shown. Now, I also mentioned to you that Hoboken Housing Authority has a very unique opportunity to transform itself. You're very fortunate. As Hoboken developed, it can only go so far. So it came from Washington Street all the way down to Bloomfield to Garden, down through Willow and Park, and then eventually into the Presidents, Adams and Monroe. And now modern housing has moved right next to the Hoboken Housing Authority, right across the street from you on Jackson Street. So the Housing Authority is no longer in the back of town. You're right in the middle of town. So you also have the benefit of having the 2nd Street light rail and the 8th Street light rail right next to your Housing Authority. So that gives you transportation. It makes this site particularly well suited for transformation because you have the access to transportation. And that's one of the reasons why this is a smart growth plan. Now, what I have to show you is a sequence of slides that will show you how we can take buildings down and put new buildings up without displacing anyone. So I just need a second to go through that.
Let me interject real quick. And what's very important, guys, is that, again, just going through the timeline of it, it's always critical for me to emphasize that the Board of Commissioners approved this unanimously. Initially in March of 2011. They approved it unanimously. In August of 2012, it was scaled down from its original concept and strategic capacity to a number that they said they can live with, which was 1,002. And the subcommittee chair, and at the time, those members who were on the Board of Commissioners, which I will bring up those slides as well, so that you can understand there was a subcommittee, or those billboards, because there was a subcommittee that actually led this determination. It's not the Executive Director, Carmelo Garcia, who made the decision. It is the Board of Commissioners. And I will continue to say that it was them who unanimously approved the plan and then scaled it down to 1,002 units in August of 2012. And in December of 2012, was when they authorized for us to go out to RFQ for a developer. And then they also authorized for us to apply for the low-income housing tax credit application and for the rental assistance demonstration. So every step of the way, as we continue to push forward and press ahead, they were approving unanimously these resolutions authorizing the Executive Director to make it happen.
Okay. So I'm going to show you a strategic sequence of build and demolish that will show you how you can do this without displacing any residents along the way. The plan I'm going to show you will result in the original design of 1,800 units. As Director Carmelo Garcia had told you, that since this plan was designed, it has now been scaled back to 1,002 units. Of course, the 806 of the first units that would be done, and you would be replaced into a new housing. But this plan is an example of how we can do it in 1,800 units, and then, like I said, it was scaled down. So here's the existing condition. This is a 3D model that shows you the existing buildings, and that represents 806 existing low-income housing that you have here. This next image, hold on, I got the wrong slides here.
Bear in mind that one of the goals, or many of the goals, was to create a community in its revitalization that would have an early childhood center, that would have retail space, that would have an indoor gymnasium and community pool, that would also have space for after-school programming, tutorial services, an educational component, and cultural awareness.
So here was the plan.
And job creation.
So the brown buildings represent the existing buildings. So the first phase was to build the building right here in the parking lot for 44 units. That has since been moved to this parking lot, but for the purpose of the illustration, it's the same concept. And what we would do is build a new building, this building, which would now be here, and that building would have 44 apartments. The 44 residents that live here would be moved into this building, and then the green buildings would be ready for demolition. So you demolish those and you go to phase 2. And on that site, you build these buildings, and you see these buildings are starting to feel and look like Hoboken buildings. They're square, and they line the streets, like I explained earlier. And then the residents of this building would be moving in this new building, and then we can take this building down. It'll be empty. And we continue along the same way. You build this building here, and this building here, and then you can take these down. So the residents from here we move into this building, and then these sites become available for new buildings. And you can see here, we'll go and continue. You build on this site, and then you can take these 3 down. But they're empty because these residents have moved into the new housing. And we continue. We build the rest of the block, and then these buildings can come down. And look what happens here. As soon as you do that, the field can be put right back, and 3rd Street becomes open and connects right to the light rail. No longer do you have Harrison Gardens blocking the view of 3rd Street, but the street continues, and you can see what's happening here. This is not done yet, but if you look here, this is starting to become blocks, just like these are blocks. Now they're starting to integrate the housing into the Hoboken structure. Here we go again. We then build here. We can take these down, and we continue, and it's a series of 10 phases. When we get to this phase, we can start to build a community center and a school on the site. There's enough room for all of that. Then we have this empty site down here, and we can start building there. And we build that, and when we build this, these buildings are empty into here. We can continue going. And we build that, and that's where we started from, and that's where we wind up. Now, when you look at this configuration, these are blocks, Hoboken blocks. They're square donuts. Buildings that wrap around, and then there's the common yard in the middle, just like most of Hoboken. This plan results in 1,800 apartments. We've since scaled it down because the board felt it was too big, but that's what the original plan that won the award would have looked like. Now, I'm going to continue.
Dean, let me add that the data from the physical needs assessment never changes, nor did the concept of the phasing change. The only thing that we changed is, in amendment form, we're scaling it down. And then they said, we don't want the donut-shaped design, so you got to go back to the drawing board. Chairman Davis was part of that committee, which Chairman Davis said, why can't we have the donut-shaped design? And then they said, no, let's do something different in an open block plan. And that's when we came back to them and said, well, what about this? No, that's V1, V2.
Okay. So this now is the new plan that's been scaled down. You can still see that the streets go through, and we create the blocks. Wait, I'm not done with this.
I know, but I'm going to put it up for you. You don't have it there?
No, but this is better.
Okay, we
Just,
got it.
I can control this. Let me work this. Put that back here.
It's a great design.
Yes, I know. He gets very
Calm down. I
excited.
have it all
He
figured
gets
out.
very excited on me with that. Go ahead. But it's there. You can have it
This is
here.
better.
All right, go ahead.
So you can see here that we still kept the block pattern. These are blocks, but instead of being a completely square donut, we lost pieces in the middle here, and we lost pieces on the end. That allowed us to now reduce the plan from 1,800 and we're down to 1,000 as per the board's wishes. So you have 200 additional units.
Why did they reduce that?
Well, they thought it was too dense. They thought it was too dense. Now, in between the buildings, we're able to create little parks, and we have parking in the back. We were also able to expand the field and create a community center back here. We since revised this again to bring the community center from here right up to the corner of 5th and Jackson, and that's this plan. So the community center was removed from here, and it was moved up here on the corner of 5th. It just has a pool in it, and all of the existing Mama Johnson field would stay, and the new splash and play would stay, and this whole back area here would be recreation courts. But this is the latest plan. It's 1,000 units. Now, let me just finish this presentation. I have 2 or 3 more slides on the... Okay, just to complete my points about the transition, what you have here on the top is the current view of the Housing Authority buildings, and what you see here on the bottom is the vision of what this could be. And you can see that those buildings would look and feel more like Hoboken buildings. They look like townhouses, they look like row houses. That's what it would look like.
How many floors are they going to make?
Now here's the actual newspaper when we won the award. This is from the Jersey Journal. This is May 2011. We won the Smart Growth Award, and that was the rendering that we used. That's what the corner would look like at the corner of Jackson and 4th.
Oh, I like that.
And this, by the way, this is former Governor Brendan Byrne, who's part of New Jersey Futures, Tom Kane, who actually handed out and gave us the awards at the New Jersey Futures.
Nobody remembers that?
Selected by Nisha.
Oh, that's it. There you go.
And this is the final slide. Director Carmela Garcia was telling you about Jersey City. They just did this down on Duncan Avenue. We went down to watch them. This is the high-rise buildings, which are actually more modern than yours. They were taken down, and this is the new housing they got on Duncan. This is the same thing that we want to do here. See, this is an actual, true life example in our next town. Jersey City has done this to 3 of their projects, 3 of them. And we in Hoboken can't get it done here. We have to keep diligent with the Director Garcia to keep pushing and keep trying, because we can, we will watch us.
Watch us. We will watch us. We can. We will watch us.
That was great. Give me the big hand. We're gonna put the other one. I gotta tell you.
Picture from my new house.
First of all, that was such a delight, because I love the fact that Dean is showing his passion and conviction for what we are pursuing here. This mission that we have gone out and said to the city and all the residents in Hoboken, we can, we will watch us, is not just a creed, but is the reality of what we know the residents, in its majority form, the residents who have elected the presidents, vice presidents in each tenant association, which they are here. And I ask that you stand up, the presidents and vice presidents of each tenant association. Give them a big round of applause. And Sandra Smith represents Vice President of Andrew Jackson Gardens South. Kyla Colon represents Andrew Jackson Gardens South as the president. Margie Biard, the president of Andrew Jackson Gardens North. Barbara Reyes, vice president of Harrison Gardens. Arlette Braxton, president of Harrison Gardens. Margie, vice president. Miss Yvette Miles. Rob Davis represents CCG, Christopher Columbus Gardens. So overall, the residents who elected these officers serve on what is called the Resident Advisory Board. Every step of the way, from creation to then in 2011, 2012, we have included the residents, the officers of the association. Deborah Morissette, every single one. And at first, some even had, some had a lot of questions, some were definitely concerned, but guess what? They were all flushed out in these meetings and in the forums that we were having with facts. And we say that we will continue to speak truth to the lies, because the reality is that this has not been about increasing the density to add, a whole boatload of housing in affordable housing. It has always been, Ms. Braxton, it has always been the case that our focus has been on the 806 units to be replaced. Whatever the balance was of the 1,002, which is 196, that would be determined by the Board of Commissioners, because this was a 10-year plan. So the Board of Commissioners at the time would decide what they would do with that balance, whether it was 50% move to work, 50% market rate, a third low income, a third move to work, a third market rate. That decision is theirs in the future. Originally, we wanted to go on tour with Vision 2020, and we were instructed, I was ordered to stick to phase 1. Do not go to the rest of the city on Vision 2020. Stick to phase 1. That's what they instructed me to do, and that's what I did. Lo and behold, we were struck with Sandy, and we all remember the devastation that it caused, how the properties were ravaged. We went 15 days without electricity, 20 days without heat and hot water. Harrison Gardens was held hostage because the water did not recede till 6 days later. We remember what that was like and what that felt like. And at the end of the day, there was a blessing in disguise, and that is that Sandy accelerated the funding sources and opportunities through the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Funds that President Obama and Governor Christie at the time, along with Congress, were all pushing for these funds to help those 9 counties that were devastated, to restore and build with mitigation new buildings that would be Sandy proof. That was our goal, and that is still our goal. And for those of you who are joining us that are non-residents of Hoboken, all I can ask is that while you sit through this presentation and you participate in the conversation, that you speak about the facts of how this plan will not only transform and revitalize our community, but will bring back a neighborhood. Because Hoboken is a city for everyone. And the Mama Johnson Field has been an integral part of this community, because the purpose of us renovating Mama Johnson Field was to, in fact, embrace and bring everyone down to the heart of the Housing Authority, so that they would understand that this is what integration is all about. And we've done that. As a matter of fact, I got to give a big shout out to our Zog Sports kickball team that was the champions last night. Captain Kevin Grooms. Captain Kevin Grooms. So when you see the young professionals playing from 7 to 11 o'clock at night on our kickball field, and our team and our residents are cheering on those teams as well as they're cheering us on, that is what a neighborhood is about. Lo and behold, in December we went out for RFQ. Dr. Powell, who I will invite to speak about the process, we went out, we put a request for qualifications together. We wanted to bring in the best of the best. We assembled a great team to basically allow us to proceed with an application for the low-income housing tax credit and the rental assistance demonstration program. And it took us 4 months till April of 2013 for us to basically agree, and with your assistance, get the Board of Commissioners to approve an award to select that developer, which is RPM, Joe Portelli, who's here representing them. And he'll talk a little bit about what the process entails when you're going after the tax credit funding. And they just won, RPM, out of 20 awards. You know that we were waiting for July 31st to get an answer. Unfortunately, on August 2nd, we found out that we did not get our award. Unfortunately, our application, because of the fact that we did not have the certificate of need, that resolution of need, was a deficient application. And therefore, out of the 20 projects throughout the state of New Jersey that received an award, the max number of points that we could have won were 90 points. But because we didn't even have that resolution of need from the city council, which was at a deadlock on a 4-4 vote, and we didn't have that support, we basically fell short, unfortunately, and we did not get selected. But the 20 projects that did, three of those projects awarded, RPM was the developer, the partner on those projects. And I know some of us were disappointed, but the great news is that there are more rounds to come due to disaster recovery funds. But they will continue to use the tax credit guidelines, and if we pursue a 4% tax credit application, we still need the resolution of need. And that is why we continue our efforts at the city council meeting, which to this day I still have not gotten my date 3 months later to present to the city council, but I will continue to remind them that we want that date. And I've written to the council president, and I'll continue to pursue by email the request. So what I'd like to say is that in January, Pam, of 2013, more work was required because we knew that we would have to submit a zoning board application on phase 1 that required board authorization. The Board of Commissioners again approved unanimously for us to have these professionals, okay, increase the cap of their service, increase the cap on their service so that we can submit a zoning board application. And I remind everyone that we have invested $170,000 of taxpayers' dollars to get to the point of submitting an application. And unfortunately, because of the lack of a resolution of need, we will never probably be able to get that award under the 9% or 4% tax credit. I have had multiple conference calls with HUD. I have advised them of the situation. They're well aware by reading in the newspaper or online stories about what we continue to, our fight is all about, and what we continue to advocate for. And HUD has promised that they are going to be sending out letters asking why don't we have the city council support and the mayor's support on phase 1. Because at best, all we've been pursuing was phase 1 to build the first 44-unit building. Because Sandy had accelerated the opportunity for us to submit an application. So it wasn't that we were always transparent. In the 112-page plan, it's always been on our website. The fact of the matter is that no one probably really read the plan or thought that this plan would come to fruition. But it is, it's here, and they have to deal with it. Because the most powerful force in the universe is an idea whose time has come. And I know that now more than ever, this idea is real, and it's our time, and it will come. So just to close out, before I let Dr. Bob Powell come up and talk to you about the financial structure to finance the project, in February of 2013, we had meetings with the mayor. Dr. Powell, did we not have a meeting with the mayor?
We did.
Did I not have the plan with me?
Yes.
Did I not have the amendment with me?
Yes.
And I sat and we talked about Vision 2020. I won't disclose at this point what that conversation entails. All I can say to you is that when it was asked and the objections that were presented, we said, no, Madam Mayor, we've already addressed all of these things have been addressed. It's in the plan. The Bill of Rights is there for the tenants. We've talked about this phasing, and I was asked, well, in that first, Dean, can you go back to that slide on with the first 42 units? In that first parcel, why can't we put market rate housing there? And I said, you can't, because we have to first take care of the 806 families or units. That is the first step in the process. And then I said, well, if you have a parcel, if the city owns a parcel and you want to swap, because the question that she asked is not only can we build market rate, but why don't we move the residents out into other parts of the city? And I said, well, how can we do that?
Yeah, but they control it.
We don't have another parcel of land to swap. If you do, then we can pursue that, but that was not the case. So these units here that we were talking about was exactly what she inquired to us about, and Dr. Powell was there as a witness. So in March of 2013, here's the great news. In March of 2013, we were informed by HUD that our rental assistance demonstration application was approved. HUD had approved it.
Good.
Right? That was March of 2013. So we had the RAD, we had the rental assistance demonstration program funds. Then in April of 2013, the board selected RPM, which was a rigorous process, and in the packets we have basically the selection criteria that was used, the 5 key considerations that we talked about, which the 5 key considerations were the management fee, the developer's fee, Section 3 job creation, the housing authority maintaining its rights to be the property manager and doing the maintenance, and them doing the supervisory role and compliance. And number 5, experience, yes, and the highest grade would be used to construct that building. That's one of the discussions that we had. There was always a generator that would be a part of it. There was always, and I'll let Joe talk about that, but the things that the mayor objected to, which the correspondences are in here, all 8 points that she had brought up as concerns or obstacles, all 8 of them, which Joe Portelli and Bob Powell can attest to that, were met. There was no doubt that we had covered all of our bases. In May of 2013, we received a letter that we did not anticipate. May 1st, 2013, which is in the correspondence of the mayor saying that she cannot support the Phase 1 project of Vision 2020. We went to the city council that night, May 1st, and we pled with the city council and said, please consider us for the certificate of need, which in the meeting in April, there was a meeting in April that we sat down and I went to introduce RPM to the mayor and her director of community development and the assistant business administrator, and we sat and we discussed. After the introduction, we discussed the building design, we talked about everything that was of concern. That was in April, and they can attest to the fact that we were shocked when we got the letter saying that there would not be support for Vision 2020, which led to the deadlock at the city council meeting, unfortunately. We didn't leave there until about 1 o'clock in the morning, and unfortunately we did not, the residents, the members of the Resident Advisory Board were there in full support, and we did not get that certificate of need. We went back May 15th and tried again. And on that day, the New Jersey Home Mortgage Financing Agency had approved our bond. Is that not true, Mr. Portelli? That's correct. Dr. Powell. So at the end of the day, we said to them, we just got approved by the New Jersey Home Mortgage Financing Agency for our bond. Please, give us this certificate of need. Give us this resolution, which is a simple resolution that says, you, the city of Hoboken, acknowledges that there's a need for newer, public, affordable housing. That's all it says. And he can talk about that. So, to this day, August 2013, we are going to continue to seek the certificate of need, and we're going to continue to take this plan on tour. And we're going to educate everyone and implore them to join the conversation and band with us in this journey, because I do believe that ultimately we will prevail in winning the hearts and minds of those who may not know what Vision 2020 is about and will now experience Vision 2020 with us. So with that said, I'd like to just ask Dr. Bob Powell to speak about, in his brevity, on what that process entailed.
I may try to use the mic so I don't have to. Is this better? Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Is that better?
No, it's just a real. There you go.
Okay. Carmela gave you a big picture of what's happened with the first phase. Let me give you very briefly some of the details. Can you hear me now?
Speak into the microphone better.
We went from the Vision 2020 plan, which was a long-range, big-picture program, and starting at the beginning of this year, our mission as part of the team was to get started with phase one. A real building with a real schedule and a real budget so that we could demonstrate that the Vision 2020 plan was really going to happen. We've designed a 44-unit building, which is not a very big building. We have a location for it, which the Housing Authority owns. And the challenge of this building is the challenge that any low-income housing building will have, which is this. This building will cost as much to build as a 44-unit market rate apartment building would cost in Hoboken. It's a relatively expensive building to build. The difference between this building, in terms of financing it, and an apartment building somewhere else in town that charges market rate rents, is that you can't just go to a bank and borrow 75% of the cost, which is what a normal developer would do, because the rents are not very high in this building. The rents are subsidized. So most of the capital that's needed to build a building like this needs to be capital that does not have to be repaid. It has to be a grant of some kind or another. This building, just to give you some basic numbers, is going to cost about $12 million to build for 44 units. The good news is that we arranged the financing for this building so that it would have very, very little debt. Out of the $12 million, we had arranged a structure for financing that would involve only about, I think, $1.5 million of debt from New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency. The other $10.5 million of funds that we were going to need for this building were going to come from basically two sources. Something called a tax credit transaction, which the federal government and the IRS code allows you to do. You sell tax credits to investors who get special tax breaks on their income taxes for investing in subsidized housing. And they give you the money in return for the tax benefits they're going to get over the next 10 years. That was going to raise about $7.5 million of the $12 million. And the other $3 million or so we were going to get from, Carmela made reference to this, the emergency CBDG money that the federal government gave to New Jersey because of the Sandy hurricane damage. $100 million came into New Jersey just for affordable housing because of Hurricane Sandy. A one-time appropriation from Congress. Maybe there'll be some next year, but this was a big one. We had counted on $3 million of that money to be allocated to Hoboken to match the tax credit proceeds and a small bond from HMFA. And it worked. The numbers worked. The project was eligible. It was qualified. And even though the competition for these funds was fierce, as Carmela pointed out, our feeling was the team we had put together, including RPM, was really strong and competitive. But we had one basic problem. Legally, in order to get both the HMFA loan and the tax credit funding, the law requires that the city council in the municipality in which this project is going to be built has to pass a couple of relatively simple approval resolutions, just to indicate that it knows what's going on and that it doesn't object to the project. One of these was the certificate of need that Carmela mentioned, and the other was something called a tax abatement agreement that would apply to this building that would protect the building from unexpected tax increases over the next 30 years. Keep in mind that the building was going to be built on a parking lot that's right now tax exempt. So the city's getting no taxes at all from the site. The tax abatement agreement would have generated about $30,000 a year to the city. And by the way, if the building were built and were not subject to a tax abatement agreement and paid full taxes, guess what the taxes would be every year? About $30,000 a year. It was roughly the same because the building would not be assessed at a very high value because the income is very low in the building. So we needed both of those things from City Council. As Carmela said, we went in twice, spent a lot of time trying to explain it to the City Council, and during that period of time in May, our applications were pending in Trenton. We actually got the approval on May 15th from HMFA on our bond financing. And in a very unusual condition, HMFA's board said, we've approved your resolution, Hoboken Housing Authority, subject to your getting us these resolutions to the City Council within the next couple of days, the next week, which we actually told the City Council that night had happened. We still didn't get the approval. So there was a source of funding that had been identified that would have provided adequate money to build this building. And we couldn't get access to it because so far we have not yet achieved the cooperation we need from the City Council. We have not collectively given up on that. We think that, as you've heard tonight, the case for this funding for a relatively small first step is a very strong case. So we'll keep trying. I will also tell you in all honesty that the chances in the near term of replacing that pool of money for this first building in the next like 12 months are not great because other people have come in and gotten the allocations of tax credits and special Sandy hurricane money. They've gone to other towns for affordable housing projects that are going to be built in other towns. So we are now looking very carefully at what's available in 2014 in the way of subsidies. And I'm not sure whether we're going to have access to the same amount of funding that we had hoped to have for this first building as was available this year. So we haven't given up. We have a very strong team. One of the reasons that we went to the developer community to bring in a developer was that we wanted to present a picture to the Housing and Finance Agency of a project that was going to be well sponsored with competent partners to do the construction, the design, to handle the complex financing that's involved. The Housing Authority here in Hoboken is very good at a lot of things, but over the last 50 years, it really hasn't built a lot of new buildings. That's not its comparative advantage. Almost all of the housing authorities around the country now that are competing for these kinds of funding opportunities typically partner with new construction with private affordable housing developers. So we decided, after talking to HUD and HMFA and the Housing Authority Board, that we needed a partner. We put out an RFP. We interviewed 9 of the leading housing developers in the country who specialize in affordable housing, went through an interview process, checked references and financial strength, narrowed it down to 3, and through the final process with the board's input, we picked RPM. And the good news is some of these are based out of state, some of them are in state. RPM is basically right here in our neighborhood up in Montclair. And they're very experienced in New Jersey. They are actually one of the most successful firms of its kind in getting funding from the state of New Jersey to build affordable housing, which is one of the reasons we wanted them on our team. So we have a great team. We have a great project. We have a great case to be made. The numbers work. What we're missing at this point is the support, the legal support that we cannot do without from the City Council. The City Council has it within its authority to stop Phase 1 if that's what it decides to do. So that's sort of where we are at this point, and we're traveling hopefully, and these meetings hopefully will help explain to folks who may not understand the merits of this project, why it makes sense. The project that we just talked about, Phase 1, does not require any money from the city of Hoboken. It actually generates a small amount of extra money in terms of taxes that are being paid now. So there's no subsidy involved here for the taxpayers of Hoboken. The funding was in place from other sources, which makes our inability to get support from the city council particularly frustrating. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bombal. So what we're going to do now is open it up for any questions, and we will have the answers. In the last forum, there were some good questions, and I appreciated the conversation because there were a few things that we had to demystify. One of them is that in the packet, we offer the memorandum of understanding that we had signed with RPM, the developer. And what the question was is, well, does this mean that the authority, go back to the authority? In the MOU, it was stated that we would have a 65-year term based on the 50-50 split with respect to the developer fee, based on the 70-30 on the management fee, 70% to the housing authority, 30% to the developer. So there's been like this boogeyman syndrome scare about all these developer fees and what have you. And what I have told folks, and that's why I'm glad Joe Bertelli's here, because he can tell you that this is a formula that was constructed by the New Jersey Home Mortgage Financing Agency under QAP, and Joe, that is under the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit program. So just quickly, Joe, can you address that? Since we're having this tonight videotape, I want you to just acknowledge that this is not something that the Housing Authority goes and requests of you, that this is what is available. And the reason why, as of right, they allow you to earn this, which is normally around 12–15% of the development project, is for purposes of operating like under the asset management model like the private sector, where right now when we're losing this funding through the sequestration, that fee that would be generated can infuse that funding that we're losing that goes back into resident services, back into the infrastructure of our buildings and its community. So Joe, please, if you can talk about that.
Hi everyone.
Hi. Hi.
I'm Joe Portelli, Assistant Vice President of RPM Development Group. Thank you. So you've heard a little bit about the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. There are competitive tax credits and non-competitive tax credits, and most recently we were seeking the competitive tax credits. And the way those are allocated to different projects is that each state, they receive an allocation of credits from the federal government, and each state makes its own rules, sets its own policy objectives and scoring criteria as to how they would like to fund projects. In addition to the scoring and the policy objectives, they set forth some basic rules that each project has to play by. And one of the regulations is about the developer fee. And the reason why the developer fee is relevant for affordable housing is because that's how we pay our bills, and that's how I'm able to pay the bills and eat. That's how we make our living. But because there are such generous subsidies involved, the fees are capped, and the QAP allows you to budget up to 13% of the developer fee. The other reason for that is because affordable housing projects do not generate much in the way of cash flow, which is how a traditional real estate development or developer would earn its money over time. That just isn't there for affordable housing projects. So the developer fee is what's in it for the developer. And we share that with the Housing Authority because they're bringing certain elements to the table, like the land and other federal resources. So that's the basics of the developer. The developer fee is paid through the budget, through the different funding sources, through the Housing Authority owns the land. And it's leased to, the improvements, the building is leased to excuse me, the land is leased to an entity that's set up specifically for the purpose of owning and operating the building. And that's important because it separates the risks of real estate development from the housing authority, puts it all on the private sector. And that's what we bring to the table, the capacity, the experience, and the ability to manage the risks associated with the real estate development process.
Hi.
I just add something about the lease that Carmela wanted me to add. The issue about the land lease, I understand, has been the subject of some confusion. A couple of basic points. The housing authority owns the land on which the first building is going to be built. The housing authority will continue to own the land as far as the eye can see. It's going to enter into a lease with an affiliate of RPM for a term. The term is going to be a rather long term, probably going to be 60, 70 years. At the end of that term, everything on that site, including the building, reverts to the housing authority.
There you go.
It goes back to the housing authority. RPM at that point does no longer have a legal interest in the building, the improvements, anything on the land. It reverts to the housing authority. Now, only a few of us in this room will be here at that point in time, including Carmela. But it's important for policy purposes to understand that this is an asset of the housing authority that the housing authority is not turning loose on. A related question, why 60 or 65 years for the term of the lease? And the answer, it's a kind of a complicated tax answer, but let me try to make it simple. We need to structure this transaction for the tax credits so that for tax purposes, RPM can be deemed to, quote, own the building. If it can't be deemed as a, quote, owner of the building, we can't get the tax credits. Because only owners can get tax credits. Now, for those of you that are not tax lawyers, including me, I'll try to make this real simple too. You can actually, for tax purposes, be deemed an owner of real estate if you lease it for long enough a period of time. But if you lease it for 5 years, you're not an owner. And under the what they call the safe harbor rules that a lot of tax lawyers and courts have finally worked on, the tradition and the custom in the affordable housing business is for transactions like we're talking about here tonight, which are very customary across housing authorities all over America. There is a long-term lease at the end of which it's very clear that everything goes back to the landowner, but during that lease whole period, the developer is deemed to be the owner. The other point Joe made that I think ought to be underscored so that folks don't, again, get confused by it, is that it's really important to remember that the owner of this building is not making very much money at all as a landlord year after year after year. If this owner had built a market rate rental property somewhere else in Hoboken where the rents go up and the market gets great and people are paying $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a month for their one-bedroom apartment, the owner of that building can count on a fairly substantial cash flow over the years, refinance it, sell it at a profit, and make a profit. There's a huge difference in the case of this building. The rents in this building may or may not go up, but not according to the market or what Joe Portelli's company decides to do, but only depending upon what HUD says is allowable.
You answered my question.
And that's going to be the case whether he owns it or the housing authority owns it. And you can count on the fact, in all likelihood, that those rents are not going to be skyrocketing over the next 65 years. They're going to be keyed to a percentage of income.
Of what HUD states.
The same formula that is applied to the existing inventory. So, Joe's going to have to take some risks. He's going to have to invest some money in this building and take some risk that something could go wrong, and he's going to have obligations to these tax credit investors in case something does go wrong that causes him and his partners to maybe have to put some more money in the building. The only reason he would do that is he's going to get a fee. He's going to get a fee over a period of years, which is regulated by HMFA and reviewed by the Housing Authority, and on top of that, we negotiated with him an arrangement whereby he's going to split that fee 50-50 with the Housing Authority. That's actually not particularly common in these deals.
That's what the housing authority.
That's what the housing authority. So the housing authority will be getting half the fee, RPM will be getting half the fee, and it'll be spread out over a period of years under the rules of HMFA, because they have to look at all this too, and the tax credit investors also have something to say about the fee. So there's a lot of transparency to the fee. But this is not the same as a market rate building that a developer is going to come in and make $1 gazillion on in 10 years because rents have skyrocketed. This is an affordable housing project where all the income is severely and tightly regulated by the United States government.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob.
They can't say that you're pocketing the money. That's what they say, that the rest of the money.
None of that, exactly. First of all, as I said in one of my previous meetings, it's unfortunate that we have to continue to debunk these lies, but we will. And no one, as a professional that I am, as executive director of this authority, licensed to run and manage housing authorities, and none of these professionals would jeopardize our license, our careers, for any stupidity of what used to happen with other projects throughout the state or country with developers. That will never happen. You know, it's a shame that folks have tried to create, like they try to paint this boogeyman picture of that, you know, and it's usually because, unfortunately, it involves the executive director and the biases that exist, which I've addressed those. They do exist, and it's a reality. It's the pink elephant in the room that I address because it exists. And we live it, it's an experience that we've had, but none of us would put ourselves at jeopardy to go against the compliancy of what the investors require, of what the low-income housing tax credit program requires, which is an IRS program. It's funded by the IRS.
You don't play with them.
You do not play with Treasury. You do not play with Treasury, whether it be the developer, the investors, the housing authority, its executive director. So none of us would dare. First of all, we have too much of great ethics for that purpose, but also we would never place ourselves in that predicament, even from a compliancy standpoint. One of the things I wanted to address, and I'm happy that there's someone here who's come to this forum a second time as well, which is Rosemary. I think yes, I know, and I appreciate you being here because there were some questions, and that's why I wanted them to address those from the folks who were at the last meeting, and I appreciate your support in being here again, because again, with the professionals, I had to do this without any of my professionals at the last forum, and fortunately having them, as I noted to someone in the audience, if you don't believe me, then you can email any of my professionals or email myself. I did not get an email to this day, but we have the answers to those questions which we've answered tonight, and we'll have on video for anyone who has any other questions to that. And then we have you as an ambassador, hopefully that can help in those answering those questions.
I think this, I just want to say, that this kind of and there's so much information that
I agree, and I thank you. And we're trying for the city council. So hopefully we'd like to do the same presentation. What she said was that she believes that these kind of presentations are excellent. There's so much information that flushes out a lot of the misnomers and it allows for the debunking of those misnomers that are out there, that are put out there deliberately.
Yeah, because one of them was about the developer was
correct. One of them was
own the building, that they were going to, you know, control our rent and our everything, you know, that it was the developer's building. It wasn't HUD.
So they tried to employ the 1990s fear tactic of saying, the fear mongering of saying, oh no, you're going to be evicted because the developer's going to own the building and all this nonsense that does not exist.
That's why I mentioned Duncan.
Yeah.
That's what everybody thinks.
I remember that was an issue that Carmela gave us a heads up about, and it might be worth, at the risk of going over something that many of you may already understand, how people are screened to sign leases that will go into this new building. They have to go through the same screening and qualification process that one would have to go through to take the vacant apartment and enter Jackson Gardens today. There's an income verification. In fact, it's going to be even more disciplined because it's important for the tax credit investment to be done properly. That only works if the units are all leased to qualified low-income people. And that's why it's all like belts and suspenders, that there won't be any adjustments to the rules for rental rates in these buildings. They will be strictly followed in accordance with the HUD guidelines. And if they're not, Joe Portelli's company will probably have some penalties to pay if for some reason rents are higher than allowed or people get into the buildings that are not qualified as low-income tenants. That's a violation of the covenants with the tax credit investors and with HMFA and of course with the Housing Authority. So
it goes by your income.
Okay.
He said the screening process, that's for new tenants, that's for residents.
When we, correct, yeah, what he's saying is that for these kind of projects, as you move forward, you have the same or tighter screening process as HUD. Correct, when you first got here, correct, yeah.
if you're eligible now, you'll be eligible then.
Yeah, exactly. That's the answer to your question, Tyler.
Okay, so the next question is, you mentioned that it costs $12 million for phase 1. So now we're moving to, say we started on phase 1, we on phase 2, we get down to phase 4, government start cutting the budget, and things change, situations, circumstances change, funding, money gonna flow, everybody gets scrambling. What happens next? How do you move forward?
You would have a hybrid probably, and we'd have existing buildings with newer buildings. And the way we move forward is, alternatively, I've placed a challenge on Dr. Powell and his team where what would happen if in fact there were no funding sources and we had an issue with the IRS or with the loans without tax credit. There are loans. There are FHA, in the packet I put an article about FHA providing what they call 221K loans and all these type of loans that they would find a way to structure the financing of that deal. And because we have the real estate, the equity and appreciation that will be leveraged to take out a mortgage.
All right, so you're saying that, for instance,
Now we're speaking hypotheticals here.
hypothetically,
So I don't like to speak in hypotheticals, I don't have a crystal ball.
I'm hypothetically saying, so.
And we're talking 8 years from now.
8 years from now.
Okay.
So we're saying, once phase 1, phase 2, wouldn't that help pay for the future phase or the next phase? How would that work?
Well, it all depends. One of the goals is that on phase by phase 3, right, that we would get concessions to build that community center with the pool and the accoutrements or the amenities that we'd be looking for. So there would be the housing authority on the development fee, let's say we put it in reserves, right? And then from what rents we're getting, you know, that sustains that building. And the maintenance is lower. The cost of the maintenance now on a newer building is definitely much more cheaper than on existing buildings right now. So that's a big factor. Because there's no way on the old buildings am I going to pay for the maintenance that I would on the new building. Okay? It's a dramatic decrease of probably 60% from where I'm at now, and the numbers that we run is 60 to 70%. So that would answer that question. The utilities would still be included. We're not sub-metering. We're not sub-metering, which is a question that I know came up with David doing any sub-metering, and we said no, that would not be part of it. Well, you might get a utility allowance that would allow you to get a check back if you're not spending that much utility. If your meter's coming in lower than what the utility allowance might be, yeah, you get a check back. That's what happens with Section 8 basically currently. That's what happens with Section 8. Margin.
Yeah, you saw me.
On each floor, let me ask you two. Is it going to be wash and dry on each floor, or is it going to be downstairs, or we are allowed to have one dryers in the house? Where the
The wash and dry, some of them would have, with respect to laundry room, or would that be?
Laundry room, each building has its own laundry room.
Each building has its own laundry room.
We can have our private machine.
Wait, time. Two things. I want to answer two questions. One, the mechanicals will be above the 13 feet floodplain, right? Which is now the new FEMA guideline. That's important to know. It would be ADA compliant, ramp based. Do we have a design that we submitted of that first building? Okay, so once, let me just bring it back to focusing on the first step, most critical, which is getting the resolution of need so that we can build phase one. Until I can build that building, we will have a meeting with all the residents to say, this is the design, what would you like to see, and you know what, that's when we can pick out the brick color, and you can pick out the green roof and all the other materials that the blue floor. The blue floor. That's when we can get there. You know, that's the bridge that we'll cross once we get first the approval of building.
I'm just speaking in future reference because I know that God has anointed us over here in our building. We just gotta go one struggle, one door closed, make a bitch go open.
There you go, love. I like that, Tyler. Amen to that. All right, Ms. Brown. Which one?
Have a contract. Like we do phase one. Have another contract for phase two.
The phase one will be 65 years. Phase 2 and 3, unfortunately, and Chairman Davis and Commissioner used to tell you, the subcommittee did not want us to go out for a developer to do phase 2 and 3. We were limited. Let me always bring it back. We were limited to stick to phase 1.
That's how it was.
So at the end of the day, if we were able to do that, then you have more of a leveraging power to say, okay, Mr. RPM, or whoever the choice is, well, in this case, the other RPM, but we would be able to do that and planning that far down.
Okay, Carol, please, you already got 4 questions. Let me go.
I got those 4 questions. Yeah. So we fight for phase 1 and then we got to do this whole process over phase 2.
But let me get this straight, Dr. Powell. Once we get the resolution of need, is that applicable for all the other phases? You got to get another resolution of need.
Yes.
So the only so it would be a matter of let me hold my tongue on that. But what I will say is that as Dr. Powell noted, yes. Yeah, all right, now. Are there any other guests, Margie?
Listen, what I want to find out is that I want you to explain to me. You say that right now the low income, we live in here, and as we get higher and are better situated in our income, is the other apartment going to be any different, or are we still in the same apartment? Because that's what I don't understand, the question that you said before. Did you say that in the red part, that you said that if you're living on a low income, as you get higher and you graduate, what does that mean? You're going to graduate to another apartment? You know what I'm saying? I want to know, there's a section for that.
What it means is very simple. Wait, listen.
I want to know if there's a section for somebody that has very low, you know, because...
Okay, wait, stop. I'm going to answer the question.
Go ahead.
Under the existing structure, Margie, you have extremely low, very low, and low income. Okay? So anything on the low income is there. You with me with that? All right, love, wait. Extremely low, very low, and low income, right? You have 30%, 50%, 80% of AMI, which is every median income, which you have flat rent tenants. Right? When they exceed, once they surpass the threshold allowable by HUD to be in public housing, you have the flat rent tenants. So basically what Dean was pointing to is that once you get to the 806 units, that balance of 196 units, then you can have low income, move to work, which would be like fair market, and then market rate. So let's say now, Margie, we are after the 806, let's say now you have, you're at the time now we're at the 9th year, 10th year, and now all of a sudden we've got those 196 units being built. The Board of Commissioners 10 years from now agrees that that's what is going to be carved out, a third low income, a third move to work, and a third market rate. So let's say now, give you an example. example, your son, right, at the time now he's making more money, got a wife, they make more money now, they're at about maybe $75,000, $80,000, right? And now they put in for those buildings, they would be eligible for those buildings, okay? So that's where, right. So in those buildings that would be built for that purpose, all right? Anyone else in the audience other than Ms. Cologne and Mr. Young? All right, we'll get to you, but I want to make sure anybody else. Yeah, Barbara, it's ready.
One of the biggest issues that we come across is the fact that they're continuously saying that we don't have a plan. That it's just a brochure, that it's this and it's that, and it's not a plan. I know we have the architects here, so this question doesn't pertain to you, Mr. Garcia. It pertains to them. What does an actual plan consist of to be considered a plan? And in your opinion, why do you think that they're stating that it's not a plan? Are we missing anything that's not in there that wouldn't?
They just like to insult Dean Marchetto, but
I'm sorry.
So I'm gonna let I'm going to take that question. All right.
And that the plan is dated 2010.
Doesn't matter when.
It doesn't matter. If it's a plan, it's a plan. 2010 and 2013 is still a plan.
Guys,
what we have laid out here, tonight, is a very clear and specific strategy, block by block, for renewing 806 obsolete units in the authority's inventory. Along the way, there are going to be some modifications and changes to the plan that are relatively small. The next building that we're talking about at Andrew Jackson Gardens may be 160 units, it may be 140 units, it may be 175 units. But it's going to be a brand new building. It's going to be probably 3 times the size of what's there now. And it will be amazing. It will be modern, energy efficient, code compliant, and the one thing that Sandy proves,
We will have a generator.
and we'll have a generator in all the buildings. The one thing about the plan that we can't drill down on now is the funding. This plan right now is 2-dimensional. To make it 3-dimensional, we need access to capital. Because these projects, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, can't be built in the traditional way of going to a bank and getting a mortgage. That isn't the way it works with affordable housing. So we had the funding lined up for phase 1. Let's assume we put it together again and we build phase 1. The next phase is going to probably require $40 million of capital. And whether that gets built or not is going to depend upon our ability to be competitive with the scarce amount of subsidies that are available in America for affordable housing. We are one of, 50 or 60 communities in New Jersey that are very competitive in trying to get these scarce dollars. You can't do these projects by and large with borrowed money. You need largely a lot of grant money. And the grant money is scarce and competitive. And what was particularly unfortunate about this last episode that we've had in Hoboken is that we were competitive. And we got hung up at home. We were ready to go to Trenton and bring the funding back to get this building built.
And to the question, thank you, Bob. Hold on. Dean, is Vision 2020 a transformation and sustainability plan?
It most certainly is. The reason why they don't call it a plan is because they haven't approved it. Once it's approved by the council, then it's an official redevelopment
But
plan.
see, this is where my concern is.
I've been drawing plans for 32 years.
And I believe
And this is a plan.
And I
This is as good a plan as I've ever drawn.
I'm with
Okay.
you. I'm not your
I'm a mayor, go see
Our
that.
question is that every time we're the same people that go and fight for this resolution and meet. And what we get thrown in our faces, you don't have a plan. You have a brochure, you have a bunch of papers, this is not a plan. So my question to you is, what is the difference between our plan and a plan that is brought to a zoning board?
We have the plan for the zoning board. If they hear us and approve it, then they would say we have a plan.
We actually
Until
have
they
an
get it
application ready to go.
approved, they're not acknowledging it. But it is a plan. Believe me, this is a plan. As good of a plan as we can make.
Okay, perfect.
Let me answer that real quickly. even if Oprah Winfrey came here and said it's a plan, they will not approve it.
Exactly.
I know that.
Exactly.
We need it on the
Okay, so exactly. So Barbara, again, and you can quote that from Mr. Marchetto that it's a plan. This man has received more awards in his career on providing plans than probably any other architect I know.
It's a plan.
Okay.
We can't be little with
Yes.
watches. It's
I have a question.
Yes.
The sizes of the units, are they going to be basically the same? The one bedroom, the square footage is going to be the
We've increased, what we've increased is there will be 2 additional 4-bedroom, because remember, we're looking at 42 to 44. And there is a difference in some of the sizes by slight difference. Yeah.
How do you know who goes in the first building?
Wait up. We said that, yeah, exactly. Well, once we get the phase 1 approved for the resolution of need, then we will decide as to what. Originally, we had 2 at the area of 208 Harrison. Then we looked at whether we could do the 510 Jackson areas, 528 area. So.
Okay, how many handicap units will you have?
You mean they'll all be ADA accessible?
I'm handicapped, so.
Which we can't do that right now in any of the Harrison Gardens buildings or in the Andrew Jackson Gardens building. Yes.
I have one more question. And I'm sorry, my questions pertain to what the city council is fighting about, so that when we go up there, we know exactly what we need to say. The next question that's floating around is, how much open space will it have? And is it true or is it not true that the open space that you guys are considering open space are parking lots?
It goes up from to 2.6, which I've said, to 4.6, if I'm not mistaken. And it's in its totality, we would have more active and passive parks. Because remember, we have the Green Beltway, which we call the Green Beltway. That's all green.
The open space that we have listed does not include parking space. It's only green space.
Thank you. Did you get that? Thank you. All
Did you
right.
get that?
Say it again, Dean. Please repeat that one more time.
The space that we show on the plan is just the green space. It doesn't include parking lots as open space.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. One final question as we will be concluding. And I just want to thank everyone for being here and being patient and respectful, listening to what we had to offer in this conversation. Yes, Ms. Paul.
The question was, you said that, have you thought the different levels of income? So, graduation.
There'll be no $50 billers.
I'm here, I'm making 45, 52,000 a year. So what's the cap on my graduation income level?
There would be no cap.
So, what about?
Yeah. Hold on, wait. If you're just so we can, you're talking about you went from the low income to the moderate to middle and then upper.
Yes.
But wait a minute, my second question to follow up is, if I'm coming in as a new tenant, what's my cap on what my income level is to come in to be that other extra?
If you were coming in at the 52,000 yearly income?
No, okay, so I'm graduating to the higher cap of the income. Now I'm a new tenant, I'm coming in, I'm making $150,000 here when I was
Girl, I like that.
versus me who started from about, now I'm at the $150,000. For some reason I don't want to move out because no both have employees isn't that great. How do we say, no, you can't come in making $150,000, but they say, but Rayela's making $150,000 and she's still here.
So we're at, so it's 2013, we're at 2023. Okay, got it. Which I want to put everybody now. 2023, right?
The low-income housing tax credit program is designed to encourage upward mobility. So let's say you're a tenant that is currently making 50% of area median income. And I don't know, that's kind of off the top of my head. But let's say you get a raise, you get a new job, you're not penalized for obtaining that raise.
Oh, so they won't kick you out?
No, you're allowed
The rent
to
just
stay.
goes up.
No.
No?
Flat rent.
So what about if I'm coming in
But if let's say you're a new tenant and you're making $150,000, like you said, but you weren't previously a tenant in the building, you would not qualify for one of the income-restricted apartments. But in a future phase, maybe there are unrestricted units.
Right,
What-
that's why I want to
Yeah. So if there's a building that has unrestricted units in it, what we call mixed income buildings, you wouldn't be able to move in.
Okay.
Can I get a can we get applause for that? I mean, these are great questions. These are really great questions. That's right. Thank you, baby. There you go. That's right. All right. Let me tell you, this is a labor of love. And as I've said to you guys, we will continue on this mission. As you see here, I am really, really proud that we continue to invite our neighbors to join us in this journey and to be a part of this conversation. Give yourselves a big round of applause. Thank you to my professionals. The next one will be September 4th. September 4th at 6 p.m., 311 13th Street, Fox Hill. And we're planning to do 3 more in the fall at the Elks Club, Roost School, and New